quick intro on me, Jared Kuehn. That's what I look like without glasses. But I could talk a whole lot about the things that I'm doing in the community, things that currently I'm working as an architect for Baker Tilly, doing a lot of things in the data engineering space. But the way I typically try to summarize myself in a nutshell is I'm trying to be a data bard. Now, what does it mean to be a data bard? Well, it comes from two different lenses. First one is technical expert nerd kind of guy. So, as Sam mentioned, I've worked as a consultant for many years. I've consulted a lot in the data industry level. Currently, I'm working as an architect level, trying to help solve kind of those bigger issues there. And certainly, a very important thing to do. But the second part of being a data bard is about storytelling. uh, I've been working on theater productions for well over 30 years now. I'm actually just about to do another production this summer. So if you find yourself in Wisconsin, check out the Oshkosh performance of Mary Poppins. You'll find me in it. Or actually, technically Winneconne, but that's geography. But why am I so particular about that? Well, it's history. If we go back to the dawn of time, early humanity, I don't think the way that we shared information with one another looked like this. Just somebody sitting there scribbling on a cave wall. I'm pretty sure, although I'd have to double check, I don't think Excel or even Lotus applications predates the fire or the wheel. I could be wrong on that. But we did not initially share information with one another through Excel documents and reports. We shared it like this: telling stories. Stories is how we best communicate information to one another. And that's something that I'm very adamant about when it comes to sharing this kind of information, because stories help people understand new concepts and new ideas. So my goal today is maybe add in a little bit of humor, but really to try and tell you a story that helps you understand the important concepts we're talking about today. Concept we're talking about today is going to be PySpark in Fabric. So I know a lot of the presentations today are talking about AI and different focuses. This isn't necessarily going to focus on AI specifically, but it's going to focus on the building blocks that go into making, or what could go into making, AI, and looking at it from the lens of, Python Spark fundamentals, and then answering this question today. If you want to do this sort of stuff in Microsoft Fabric, what does Fabric provide for you that makes your life a little bit easier when doing this kind of work? It's software as a service offering, so it should be trying to make your life a little bit easier. And like any good intro level presentation, this should be about continuing your journey beyond this presentation. So at the end, if you're already working in this space, maybe some of this you don't need that kickstart, but in case you do, here's some resources I would encourage you to take a look at to follow up on today's learning. Q&A, put those questions in chat anytime you have them. I'll do my best to stop here and there and stop for questions. All right. So we begin our story today like many data analytics stories start with a question. Questions drive our business, right? So here's my question for you today. Why PySpark? You think a lot about the conversations that happen in recent days, articles that people are posting out, content that people are creating, and consistently you hear people talking about more quote unquote traditional approaches, SQL, structured data. Some like going in the direction of Python, of everything that Python provides. Not a lot of people talk about PySpark. And so the question I bring to you today is, why PySpark? Why should this be in the discussion as well? Well, let's take a look at its closest relative, Python. And as we all know, Python has a lot of great things going for it. For people who have worked in SQL, that good fourth generation language, and they want to have more control over how things are done, Python's a great third generation language for that good object-oriented programming experience. Beyond that, Python has really exploded, especially within the past decade or so, because of the community's support in wanting to build this language further, which has resulted in many libraries that, for people like us who are trying to work with data in various aspects, it gives us a lot of benefits, right? So why PySpark? Well, there's one common thing that Python on its own has limitations on, and I know there are things that the community is talking about to try and improve this, but let's at least talk current state. There's something called the Global Interpreter Lock, GIL. If you aren't familiar with that, that's a keyword. Take a look at that. Search it on Google to find more information on it. The general idea behind the GIL is it's trying to preserve the state of our variables as things are running, and in doing so, it tries to essentially restrict things so that it restricts it thread by thread, which means multi-threading, which is the way the industry has gone to solve big data problems in a performant way. Python can run into some issues depending on the way your environment is set up. So it's something that runs into a limitation when the data gets larger. Especially with AI, we like large amounts of data, right? So that's why we get into PySpark. It's because PySpark is purely, it's a Python API for Apache Spark, right? And by doing Apache Spark things, we now get that distributed compute experience. I have a very large data set. I want to perform these operations. I take this data set, I break it into chunks. Each chunk goes to a separate computing node over here, over here, over here, over here. Each one gets the same set of instructions. Each one performs their functions separately. Once that's done, all of those results are brought back to a central location, and we get our pretty result set, nice and clean, the way that we wanted it to be. PySpark helps us solve that problem. Not that Python, especially with some things going on in the industry, can't solve it, but PySpark is better designed to do it because that's what Apache Spark was built for, distributed computing. And it still gets the same library support that we've been looking for, because in a lot of ways it supports similar functions to what Python does in a lot of cases. All right, so that's at least why we're here. Now let's at least break it apart into its two main components, Python and Spark. I'm going to at least do this as a quick overview for those on the call and for those who might look at this recording, in case you're brand new to Python. And I'll be using Python and PySpark that fairly interchangeably in this conversation because as far as the language goes, they work similar in a lot of ways. But I want to make sure nobody gets lost here because this is truly an intro-level course. So let's make sure everybody understands some fundamentals about how to read Python, and in doing so, PySpark. So here's some important things you need to know. Hit that hashtag to comment. Nope, that's not just for social media. In the Python language and in PySpark, that is also our comment. Single, and at least what a lot of people do in the industry, that's also how you do your multi-line, is just multiple lines with that hash with the hashtag in front of it. Makes it nice, makes our code nice and green, makes it really easy to read so we can easily document our code, which we should be doing, even though AI has an easy time of interpreting our code these days. Import is an important keyword. Play on words. Import means libraries. So before you ever do anything in Python or PySpark, make sure you're reaching out into the community and seeing, has anybody written a library that might make this particular use case easier? You do that, you're going to save yourself your time. You don't do that, you're going to be like me when I initially started with working with PySpark and Fabric, and I did a bunch of things by hand. Turns out I didn't have to do it. So take a look at that import opportunity. DEF indicates a function. I have one at least on the screen of DEF greet. Passes in name as a variable and does a basic hello world, or in this case, hello name. All right. Function definitions. We're talking third generation language, which means these are incredibly important. And it's a simple definition of DEF, procedure name, variables you want to pass in, colon at the end, and the next line is also important. Indents in Python and PySpark is necessary. This is not a suggestion, people. The Python language and the PySpark language define the scope of a function by the code that is indented after a DEF line. Once the code is no longer indented, even comments, it assumes the function is over and it's moving on with its life. So hopefully you're not somebody who likes having all of your code like just straight to the left and no indentations whatsoever, because if so, you're going to have a hard time here. Because this is for function calls, this is for try-catch statements, if case situations, all of those require indentation. Praise be the data frame. Obviously, if you've worked with Python or PySpark so far, this shouldn't come as a surprise. But if you're new to this, data frames are going to be your best friend when you're working with data within this language. It just makes your life a whole lot easier. And in the case of answering that question, what does Fabric provide as additional benefit? It provides you some additional benefits if you get your data in a data frame. And I'll showcase what that looks like in a demonstration in a moment here. Variables can be pretty much anything. Variable equal pass in a value. If you've worked with PowerShell, this is very similar in state. The important thing here to note is that the Python library, the Python PySpark experience, this isn't something where the data or the code is pre-compiled. This is something that happens at runtime. And as I showcased in some recent demonstrations on my YouTube channel, variables literally can be anything. You can even pass in an integer into a variable and then later pass in a string to it and later pass into an object, and Python's not going to care. It's going to let you do any of that, which on the one hand is good for giving flexible coding, but just make sure you know that a lot of these things you can't really diagnose until you actively try to run your code and then see if bad things happen. So keep that in mind. And then at least the one thing I wanted to highlight is sort of in my mind, an interesting notation for Python. Notice the line towards the bottom where it says greeting equal F, and then quotes it says hello name. That F it's got to be a typo, right? It's just F, clearly I did a bad screenshot here, right? Nope, in this case, F is a keyword. Yes, the letter F is a key word. Don't ask me why. That's just the way the language is. In that case, the F is indicating that quotation means when I use curly brackets and I reference a variable in there, I can pass a dynamic value in. For string formatting, very common situation. And that's at least a notation that, from what I've seen in the industry, is pretty common. A lot of people like using that notation. So that's not a typo. That is intentional. And at least introducing people into a language, I believe I can't bring this up without making sure people take the time, figure out how to format their code effectively, because this is a community thing. We want to make sure our code is easy to be read, not just by us, but by other people who might look at it in the future. One common guideline that's out there is the PEP 8 guidelines. Take a look at that if you're looking for any considerations for stylistic choices in your code. All right, that's the Python side. Let's talk Spark. And for Spark, we're going to start looking more at it within the scope of Fabric. Now, here again, I'm going in under the assumption that if you are truly new to PySpark and you're truly new to Microsoft Fabric, more often than not, you're not going to be your Fabric admin for your environment. If you are, then whatever I'm talking about here as conversations is stuff you need to talk to with yourself and enjoy talking to yourself as much as I enjoy talking to myself, which is weird. So under the assumption you are not going to be your Fabric admin, here's a couple things that you want to make sure you talk about with your Fabric admin to make sure they help set you up for an enjoyable experience within Fabric. First thing you want to talk about is Spark pools or hardware. If you're new to Apache Spark, we talk about our resources as pools. Pools indicates the nodes of clustered computing that we have at our fingertips to do our work. And in the case of Fabric, the capacity you have restricts the size of Spark cluster that you can create. This graphic on the screen showcases generally what are the guidelines for how large of a cluster you can create depending on your capacity. So you want to check it, because if you don't and you start running things in certain situations, you might get this screen at the bottom. This Spark job can't be run because you've hit a Spark compute or API rate limit. Means you've run out of Spark compute. In which case, you've got two options: either go up in terms of scaling up your fabric capacity, or you need to talk with your admin and figure out what's going on right now that you don't have enough compute at your disposal to do what you want to do. Have that conversation before you get started and you put something into production. You'll have a much easier getting started experience. Second thing you should talk about with your Fabric admin is environment. When we talk about environment within Fabric, where Spark pools is the hardware, environment is the configuration of the hardware. So it defines the selected Spark pool, which you can define multiple Spark pool configurations within your Fabric workspace. But it also defines things like runtime. So if I want to use a specific version of Spark, if I want to use a specific version of the Delta standard, that gets defined within your environment. Choose carefully. Also, libraries. Fabric Spark environments will innately have a lot of libraries at your disposal to use because they understand that helps save people time when building their code. Well, depending on your use case, they may not support or they may not innately have the particular library you're looking for. If that happens, environments is an opportunity to work with your admin and to get those libraries added in to your environment. That way, you're not having to do pip installs or anything like that to get the library added in. You can work with them. They can upload anywhere from publicly available libraries to even custom libraries that you build yourself can get loaded into an environment. And once you start up your Spark cluster, it's right there waiting for you to do whatever it is you need to do with your code. You do those two things, that's where you're starting to take advantage of what Fabric provides to try and make your experience a little bit easier. All right. With that, then, we'll be spending most of today in demo, but before I get too far into that, let's take a quick pause and see, does anybody have questions so far? Quick at the chat, doesn't look like I'm seeing much of anything. All right, we'll go and jump into it.
Can I ask you a dumb question?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to use Spark to manage a small SQL database on your own personal computer if you wanted to keep everything on a personal computer? Is it overkill or is it possible? How would you rate it as a personal data manager?
Are you talking specifically within the context of Fabric, talking about like Spark and Python in general?
Um, I don't have an opinion about that. I just wonder. I'm trying to build an app that records personal information for AI, so it needs to have a unstructured data for images and text, and also keep track of structured data. And I don't know if there's overkill in using PySpark or there's not, because I think there's SQLite, but I don't think that's for unstructured data. So I'm searching for a solution that doesn't overwhelm a personal computer.
So at least if you want to do that within the context of something like Fabric, you can work with pretty small PySpark environments that, like the F2 SKU, if that fits your budget, it's about $270 a month. That's at least about the smallest you get. So in a case like that, if that fits your budget, you could probably do that. For PySpark, I guess, like, unless you're getting into like hundreds of millions of records plus, might be a little bit overkill. You might be better off for stuff like that, just focusing on Python, getting a Python environment installed in your local PC where you have your database stored, and just doing your work there. Like, could you do PySpark? Theoretically, yes. I don't know if you'd get a whole lot of benefit from it beyond just going with straight Python.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, though. This is an intro level presentation. There's no such thing as dumb questions, especially in intro level presentations. It's not a thing. So good question. Thanks for that. All right, let's take a break from this and let me bring up. So I'd like to spend most of today in a live demonstration of Fabric, what it gives you. So again, the scenario here is focused a little bit more on the data engineering sides, but hopefully the things that I'm going to show you that provide benefit will help you regardless of whether you're doing more just typical data engineering or you're targeting an ML or AI implementation. This is our lovely screen that shows all of the things that we can do within PySpark in Fabric. And how did I get here? Well, everything in Fabric is workspace driven. So in this case, I'm doing everything within my own personal workspace. And as long as I'm working in a workspace that's Fabric enabled, I can go up into New Item and I can search for Notebook. I suppose I didn't mention it up until this point, but when you're working within Fabric and you want to work with PySpark, unless you're creating more of an automated Spark job, most times an interactive experience is going to be through the use of Jupyter Notebooks, which I can search for Notebook. And I find 4 options. What is going on here? Well, this is at least where the Fabric UI today tries to organize a lot of the assets, the items that you can create in Fabric by general use case. So getting data you can do with notebooks, prepare data you can do with notebooks, so on and so forth. What's the difference between them? Nothing. They are 100% the exact same thing. There's no difference between them. It's just the way things are organized. So if you find this, just pick one. You'll get the same experience from all of them because they are literally the same thing. And then that opens up this lovely UI experience here. All right, before we get into code, let's talk about some UI capabilities. Jupyter Notebooks, first of all, cell-driven development, right? So we want to make sure we are splitting up our code by cells as it makes sense so that we can do things like not only having functional code, but also having things like markdown cells, which is this top section I have here, which gives us nice, pretty documentation straight in our notebook about what this notebook is going to do. In this case, this notebook markdown cell is telling me the steps of what I need to show you to make sure that I'm giving you the full understanding of what Fabric can provide. Okay? So let's go ahead and go through these instructions. First thing is let's talk about the UI and about attaching lake houses and warehouses to the notebook. Below code snippets for environment info. We'll come back to that. All right, so what's it talking about? It's talking about our lovely section over here on the left. Like many IDEs have, the Fabric environment has an IDE that gives you easy ways to take a look at your data assets, your data itself. In this case, I already have a lakehouse connected in, and like most things in Fabric, the lakehouse gives me the tables where we're talking more Delta table storage, or files, which is if I have data in more unstructured formats, images, CSVs, other things like that. That goes in the files section there. How did I get this? This add data items button lets me either identify a new lakehouse or connect to an existing data source. And I can pick and choose specific lake houses, or depending on the type of notebook I'm running, specific warehouses that I can connect into. I'm already connected into mine, so we'll hit cancel here. What benefit does this give me? I mean, obviously, like most explorers like this, I can go ahead and I can take a look at like the structure of my data and see what's going on here if I want to see specific columns and all of that. All right, kind of nice, but what does this actually provide me in terms of benefit? This is where I take a moment to do what I feel is the demo that everyone is legally obligated to do whenever you are showcasing Fabric notebooks. I can click on one of these tables over here, click on it, and drag it over here. Look at what it does. It generates code. Ooh, this is not just an AI thing. This is more of just a scripting thing. So what does it do? Well, in this case, I'm working in a PySpark notebook, so this is able to generate a quick definition of connecting into my data storage within the lakehouse, pulling that data into a data frame, and this display command here just displays it to the UI. So think about that. a lot of times when you're getting started in perhaps a new environment or maybe with a new data set, how many times do we struggle with those situations where it's just like, oh, it takes me half an hour just to figure out how to define a connection to get to my data in the first place before I get to do anything else? Here I can do that in 5 seconds or less. And why? Because my notebook, my data storage is all in the same place. And as I like to say, Fabric knows itself. Because it knows itself, it knows how to find the data nice and easy, especially now because my notebook is connected to my lake house. And I say genuinely connected. There is metadata behind the scenes of this notebook right now that is identifying the good value for this lake house so it can find it. All right, that's the legal demo there. Okay, I've done my piece. You know, all right, we can move on to some more fun things. All right, so that's at least a benefit that that provides. Second thing, let's talk default language for the notebook. As I mentioned, this is a PySpark notebook. In Fabric, this isn't the only option that you have. Spark World, you have a lot of the options that are available in Spark environments. So I can do PySpark. I can work in Scala. I can work in Spark SQL. R are the current options supported within the Spark world. I could also go outside of Spark and I could do things exclusively in Python, or I could do things in T-SQL. Granted, the T-SQL notebooks are specific more to interacting with warehouses. You can technically use them to work with lake houses, but at that point, it's read-only. But this only defines my default language. So if I do something like, again, cell-driven development, so suppose I want to add in a new code cell, this spot in the lower left, right, I forget my left and right sometimes, says that this is PySpark. That's because this is the default for this notebook. I could change it to any of the others as well. I can also change individual cells to change languages. So suppose I want to access, I don't want to do it via PySpark, I want to access this table via base SQL, or at least Spark SQL. I'll drag and drop that same experience here, and it generates the same thing, but it's generating it in the context of what the cell needs. So since this is cell-driven development, you can actually change between languages. You can go, especially within the Spark world, I can go in and I can start with PySpark. I can do some Spark SQL in the middle, and then I can go back to PySpark. And you can do those interchangeably depending on what your preference is. Obviously, like, use that with a grain of salt because I don't know how much people want to constantly have to shift between like 4 languages within a notebook. But if that's your preference, go ahead and use carefully. The other thing this showcases within the UI is this little toolbar that showed up the top right part of my cell. This gives me a whole lot of benefits of some admin functions within this cell. So things like if I want to convert this to Markdown, parameters we'll get back to in a moment. In this case, I don't need this cell, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the delete cell. Makes the cell disappear. My code's clear. Okay? All right. Third thing we need to talk about, connecting into a session. What is this talking about? Well, we're working in Apache Spark. If you come from more of a SQL background, a lot of times we're used to, I'm working in an environment where, yeah, we talk cloud, compute, and storage are separated, but most times we expect databases. Your compute's always running, most times unless it's a non-production environment, right? Apache Spark takes more the inverse viewpoint of things. It does not want you to have to run your compute 24/7, because then you're paying for it 24/7. So when you're working in an environment like this, and it holds true in Spark, it holds true for Fabric. Right now, sitting here with this open notebook, nothing's happening. I do not have any compute provision, and I can tell that because I've got a connect button here. The connect button is about connecting into a session, a Spark pool that I can then do things with. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get connected in. And before I do, I have a decision to make. Standard, high concurrency. What's the difference? The isolation of your Spark compute. A standard session, that session's compute is exclusive to this notebook and cannot be used by any other notebooks. A high concurrency session, the compute that I would spin up here would be accessible via this notebook. And if I open up other notebooks as well, I can have them all use the same session. Kind of handy, at least if you're editing multiple notebooks at the same time. For sake of demonstration, I'll just do a new standard session. And this is where, like, we're talking Apache Spark, so, clearly this takes a couple minutes. Except in this case, our session started up in 4 seconds. If you've worked with Apache Spark, you might be a little confused by this right now. Because most times when we spark up our compute, depending on the size of nodes and the size of cluster we're creating, it should be taking minutes to get things spun up. Yet I got a cluster up and running in 4 seconds. Well, okay, this is software as a service. There's magic happening behind the scenes. What I'm actually doing here, and the key here, gets back to not just the compute, but the environment side that I talked about earlier. Notice my environment here says workspace default. Microsoft essentially has a bunch of Spark clusters available. They're pretty much all provisioned all the time. And when you use the default settings for both your Spark cluster, your Spark pool, and default environment settings, well, actually, no, your environment can use a default pool. If you're using the default or what we call the starter pool, you're not really spinning up a brand new Apache Spark cluster. You're actually spinning up a connection to an existing Apache Spark cluster. That's all that it's doing here. So it's not a magic shortcut, but it's a magic shortcut. Now at least we know that we're connected into a session because our connect button turned into this button here. If I want to go and see additional information about my session, configuration properties, diagnostics, etc., I can look at that here. And now that at least I'm in here, cell-driven development, so I can run each of these cells individually. So here there's the typical play button, so I can connect into that here and get my results, and just to at least prove that this could do a basic top 1000. I can also hit the run button up here, which will run all of my cells. For sake of demonstration today, we're not going to hit that button. But if you wanted to, you could. All right, here we go. Nice, simple demo data. All right. So, all right, we can do a basic top 1000. We can read out data. What's its popular other side? The L part, saving data. How do we do that? Well, there again, Fabric is trying to make things easier for you. So here's at least a couple examples of Spark notation that is taking the data frame that I just created and is writing it back to the lake house. But notice these first two examples here. This one here has a very simple notation for the saved directory. Tables, dimension, customer right. The second one here is going off the page, and it's like this.dfs.fabric.microsoft.com. What's the difference? They're saving to the exact same spot. The difference is one is looking at it relatively, the other one is looking at it absolutely. The benefit of connecting in your lakehouse here is that it allows you to then use relative paths to find your storage. So again, benefit. If I like code that has absolute paths and has to list out the entire directory, in this case of DFS storage, I can do that. Or I can simplify my code by looking at things relatively. And when we think of in terms of like deployments, dev, test, production, it's a little bit easier to notate what is going on here. And then at least the last example here is just showcasing that you can do the same thing on the file side. So if I want to write something like a CSV, I can do that as well. All right, nice and easy to read data out, nice and easy to write data back. All right, so then that leaves, all right, so that's the extract, that's the load, transform. It's the last thing we haven't talked about yet. So let's go ahead and I'll run my data set here and load it up into data frame, and let's talk about some of the things that we can do for transforming data. So I'm running this, and oh my gosh, what is going on here? Well, this data set really likes Weird Al. Can't imagine why. Gosh, this data is not clean. Oh gosh, I didn't take a look at this beforehand. And apparently he does. Well, I suppose technically he's done reggae music, so that's technically accurate, but probably not the best way to classify. Oh great. Weird Al messed up my data set. What do I do? Well, obviously this is talking PySpark. So, well, first thing at least before I do this could be maybe an inconsequential error. Like if I scroll down here, okay, things get a little bit better there. So let's just see how big of an issue this is. By default, using this display feature presents you your data in tabular format, but maybe you want to chart it out quickly. So I can hit this plus sign to do a new chart, and this helps me chart things out. And yeah, for at least the first 1,000 records, Weird Al is almost 1/4 of all the records in there. So we've got some duplication problems here that need to be fixed. Oh gosh. Well, I knew this was the one thing I could run into in terms of doing a live demo, but like, what could I do? I mean, I could say, well, all right, duplications just exist. I'll work around it. I could sit here and try and work through my brain of, okay, Python, PySpark, what's the syntax for dropping duplicates, and what is the context that I need to use that in, and going back to this table, clearly age is off because most of these ages are decimal values. That's not how we look at age. I've got some cleanup to do. Well, I could go in and I could write a bunch of code to clean it up. Or I could take advantage of something available within Fabric called Data Wrangler. What is Data Wrangler? Well, let me show you. Data Wrangler takes a look at data frames that are currently loaded into your cluster. So it's a data frame that has to be, you've got an active Spark cluster running, and you've at least loaded your data frame into memory. From there, I can select this. And what's Data Wrangler in a nutshell? Well, if you've worked in the Power BI world, you've likely worked with Power Query. Power Query is a low-code environment that lets you take a data set, apply transformations to it, and then it generates M language that is then used behind the scenes to take your data and transform it from whatever your data source is into what your Power BI report needs. Picture Data Wrangler as the exact same thing, but instead of generating M code, I'm generating PySpark code. Once the UI loads up here, I'll show you how. And at least this might take a couple moments here because this data set happens to be 100 million records for context. While it's doing this, at least the full experience of what I'm going to show you here is I'll be able to show being able to do transformations in various forms to clean up data. And then what it's going to do on the end result is it's actually going to generate the code for me and add it into my notebook. All right, so let's clean up this data because clearly there's a lot of issues going on here. And right now it's profiling the top 5,000. All right, so duplicate, let's deal with that. All right, under find and replace, there's a nice drop duplicate rows. From what I can see, things are very duplicated, so I should just be able to hit apply here, and it's going to duplicate across all cells. I could use the UI, and if I want to focus on specific columns to define uniqueness, I can do that. All right, Weird Al has been contained only in terms of this data set. You know, outside of that, you can't really contain Weird Al. All right, let's see what else we can do. This age looks like it's defining it as just a general object. It hasn't figured out its data type. Well, we may want to do calculations and such on it, right? Which means we need it to be an integer. So let's go down here to schema and let's change column type. I want to see if I can take age. Can I just convert it directly into an integer? Looks like it doesn't know how to convert this object into that. Okay, well, I can do that in a couple extra steps. So we'll convert it into a float. All right, so it can at least recognize this as decimal value. Great. All right, so we'll apply that there. We'll go into format. We'll do numeric rounding. All right, so we shouldn't expect this to be anything other than an integer. So we'll round up age to a particular value. And then let's see if it'll let me convert age into an integer. There we go. Okay, so I could have written a bunch of code to do that if I know all of the syntax. But again, this is introduction. Maybe you're brand new to the language. If so, Data Wrangler is a great tool for at least learning the basics of the language. You know, the steps here and everything, it's going to generate exactly the steps as you take it. So is it 100% expected to be the most performant way of doing it? Not necessarily. But if you're looking to get started, it's a great way to get started in. I'll go ahead and add this code into the notebook here, and I'll add in this checkbox. So talking about the difference of like, do I want to go with Python? Do I want to go with PySpark? Data Wrangler gives me the option of generating both. So if I want to work with things in more of the Python way of things, I can still do that if I want to and work with pandas data frames. If I want to work with things in the PySpark space to try and make best use of performance, that distributed computing, that's what it generates by default. At least I should be able to showcase here, working across a couple 100 million records. We'll see how long that takes to run. So ultimately, if you're in a Fabric environment, take advantage of the benefits. And in a case like this, what does this give you? Data Wrangler gives you a way of simply dealing with your transformations if it fits your use case. I will let that run just to see how long that takes. All right, and then some last things to note of more specific things that Fabric provides in terms of benefit. Cell-driven development, notebooks, orchestration. So sometimes we might want to do something within a notebook within scope of a larger automated process. And we want to make our notebooks dynamic, right? We don't want to have to write one notebook for each like file type or each everything that we do. Fabric Notebooks gives you the ability to define parameter cells. You see in the bottom right here where this cell has a parameters indication. That means that these two parameters I've defined here, or at least I should really technically say variables, these variables are now available to external calls. So if I want to use a Fabric pipeline, something low code to call this, if I want to call this from another notebook, I can now pass in values in to these variables, and then they're used dynamically within my code. Again, though, we're talking Python and PySpark, so these don't have any data types. You can pass anything, I mean anything, into them. So make sure whatever's calling this knows at least what to expect, because the parameters are just going to say, okay, I can take a value and just run, and then you won't see the error until your notebook actually runs and throws an error. So know that in terms of data types and all of that. Let's see. Oh, sure enough, took about a minute there. Go ahead and run this, but I'm guessing this is probably not going to finish in a minute. Oh wait, it'll finish faster because it only did the top of it. No, we're not going to let you cheat on that. Let's actually try and do display pandas df clean. Let's make you have to actually process the whole thing. I want to see if this actually finishes before we finish talking here. It might not. I've had this take a while. Last thing is, all right, we're talking libraries. I mentioned libraries are really important. Here's two libraries you should make sure you know about if you're going to work with PySpark within Fabric. First one is SymPy, part of the semantic link, or if you've heard about semantic link labs, this is part of that. What does this give you? I mentioned earlier, Fabric knows itself, right? Something like SymPy knows a lot about your environment, and because of that, it gives you certain capabilities to work with things in Fabric easily. In this case, semantic models. So if you're using semantic models, great use case there. In this case, I'm actually not using it for that. I'm using it for things like if I need to find out environment information. So where is my lake house here if I want to find it by name and I don't know its GUID value? This script lets me do that. Other one is an absolute must, especially if you're working with lake houses. Notebook utils. Very useful library for things like file movement, file copying. If I'm wanting to enumerate files that exist in a directory, Notebook utils has a very easy way of navigating the directories and giving you functions to then interact with things there. Must have, it gives you a bunch of useful things there. All right, let's at least do a quick check and see if it's at least still running. Oh, I gave it an error. Yeah, I'll figure that out later. Okay. I was hoping to at least show those performance benefits, which I showcase at least here. To do that cleaning step here took about a minute here in Spark. When I've done the similar test here with this, Pandas, Python, again, non-distributed, it'll take about 15 minutes to do the same operation. So that's at least the benefit, right? Why PySpark? This right here is where you get the benefit. All right, let's go back to slide decks and we'll wrap up because we're getting to be about at time here. Again, what does Fabric provide to make your PySpark experience simpler? Whole bunch of things in the UI features bar. Markdown cells are great. The lakehouse warehouse connection, making it really easy to do relative paths, is great, which then makes reading and writing data simpler. Data Wrangler then helps solve the transformation process for a lot of transformation situations. Parameter cells for orchestration, libraries. And that's not even talking about the announcement that came out about 2 weeks ago at FabCon. Notice I didn't mention anything about Copilot. Well, at least up until a couple weeks ago, if you wanted to use the Copilot innately built within Fabric, you needed an F64 or higher SKU to get access into it. Well, exciting announcements from FabCon. It sounds like by the end of the month they'll be removing that restriction, and all SKUs in Fabric will get access to all of the Fabric copilots, including the one that supports Notebook. So
I have a
that
question.
would be a big benefit. Yes.
Is there a free tier in the Fabric SKUs?
Is there a free tier in the Fabric SKUs? There is a. So I'll say technically no, but there is a trial that you can start up to use Fabric. It is a trial that runs for 60 days at a roughly an F64 capability. Um, but at least in my experiences so far, I've been running a Fabric trial for at least a couple months now, and the counter keeps resetting itself, provided as long as I stay active in the environment. So, is there a like free version of Fabric? Technically, no, but the trials do last for quite a bit of time, and that's about at least the most direct I think I can answer that question without getting hand slappy.
That's a good tip. Thank you.
I mean, it does have the trial does have additional limitations, so it's like don't use it for production workloads and whatnot. Um, but at least if you're wanting to kick the tires on this, there's a lot that you can do there. And at least presumably the trial up until this point also does not get access to the Copilot, but I'm assuming once they lift the restrictions, which should be by the end of the month, then the trial will also get access to the Copilot capability.
Sounds good.
So to wrap things up, this is intro level. All right. It's expected that at least if you are truly intro level and you're just getting started with this, your journey continues, right? So how do you want to learn? Well, that depends on truly how do you want to learn. Uh, baked into the solution, you'll have some things at your disposal. Data Wrangler, Copilot. If you're wanting to learn at least the syntax of things quickly, good tools for helping you get started there. Just obviously, especially Copilot, it's AI. Use as directed, and make sure you keep your wits about you. Maybe you're more of a visual learner, especially if you're interested in learning more about fabric. If you're not familiar with Tales from the Field, go out, Google their YouTube channel, and get subscribed to them right now. Tales from the Field is a YouTube channel run by a number of people who work for Microsoft, work closely with the Fabric product team, and do a lot of demos of various capabilities within Fabric, including the notebooks that I showed you today. If you're wanting to learn more about that, they have a lot of good introductory content. Maybe Python or the syntax aspect of it is more what you're getting used to. Programming with Mosh is also a great YouTube channel. Python for Beginners, learn PySpark in 1 hour. In 1 hour, he teaches you a lot about the language, more so than what's in my cheat sheet. So make use of that. DataBard, okay, I'm not too much for self-promotion, but at least this is the one part where I have to say I'm making content on this as well. And especially within the context of Fabric, I'm trying to answer people's questions as they have them. So if you have questions, either ones that I can answer here or ones after today's session, please reach out to me. I'm looking to help the community by building content that helps answer people's questions. So please reach out. I'm here to support. There's certainly things like the Microsoft Learn vlogs. Notebook Utils is something unique to Fabric. So check out Microsoft Learn. They've got their documentation. Senpai is a little more widely known. So there's people out in the community blogging about that. There's a Fabric community, like there's a Fabric community website. There's LinkedIn groups. There's more community stuff. And hopefully this is at least where you're seeing best way to learn this, get engaged in the community. So here's at least just a couple of areas where, again, if you're working within the context of Fabric, these are communities you should get engaged in because they're the ones who are going to most help you if you can't bend Microsoft's ear directly. And then that brings us to the end of today's story. So again, for me, if you're looking to get connected with me more personally, LinkedIn's my most actively used social media. So I post a lot of my updates and such out there. If you want to get connected there, that QR code goes to my YouTube channel, which hopefully you can see from the graphic it's not just demos. I like doing fun stuff there too. I have a comedy sketch out there I made a couple months ago, Report as a Service. If you wanted to envision what it's like ordering a report if you were ordering it from a fast food restaurant, check out the dialogue. You'll probably resonate with it more than you think. And also, at least the demonstration I showed today. If you're working in Fabric and you want to kick the tires on this demo, it's available in my GitHub repo, which will have I'll have to double check. I might have 1 or 2 bug fixes that I just added in the other day. But beyond that, it is exactly the demo that I showed today, which includes generating the demo set if you want Weird Al to take over your data set as well. But beyond that, that's all I have unless you have questions for me.
Any questions or comments for Jared?
Can you throw his links in the chat?
Yes, I just got the YouTube link. With regards to the PowerPoint, Jared, would you be able to send that to me?
Yeah, I can send that your way.
Okay, that'll be great. And then I will post that on my blog afterwards, including all the additional links.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jared. That was a great intro. I really appreciated your presentation style, especially letting everyone know there is no such thing as a stupid question. That's one thing I always reiterate. It was a job well done.
Much appreciated. Thanks again for the opportunity, and like I said, hopefully it helps people get started. And if you're looking for taking the next step beyond this, at least a little bit of self promotion, there's a Fabric Global Online conference happening in 11 days. I'll be giving a similar talk to this, but it'll be kind of taking the next step of like ETL patterns within Fabric and utilizing PySpark. So if this interests you, you're looking to take the next step, more content coming your way.
What's the link for that conference?
I knew you were going to ask that. Give me a moment.
Or if you could give me the name of the conference again, and I can search for it.
It's the Microsoft Fabric Global Online Conference, and then you have to specifically look for the one coming up is the North America version of it. They did it globally last time, and then this time I think they're starting to break it up into regions.
Okay, I think this is it. Let me paste it in chat, and you can verify it for me. Yep,
Yep,
that's
that's
the one,
one.
Douglas. Douglas beat me to it.